a beautiful night in the hood. It's a beautiful night in the hood. Gonna be hanging out in the hood.
Hi, welcome to Almost Cooperstown.
I'm Mark.
And this is Gordon, and we love talking about baseball.
So we had this concept to talk about rule changes in the game, but we're in a lockout situation right now, and it had us both thinking that there are rule changes that happen after work stoppages. So maybe we should talk about the work stoppages first, and that'll kind of give us a viewpoint on the rules themselves.
Just look because of the previous labor stoppages in the Major League Baseball, some of them were about changing the rules of the game. I think looking at the 72 one, which was the first one, where that brought in the DH, and that was a big rule change for baseball. Really, I think it was more the 94 one where that was more about money than it was about the game itself.
And I know you don't like it when I read stuff, but I think it's worth, and we agree that we would go through the labor stoppages.
I think it's important in this case because this is an important labor stoppage year, because I think this is one where baseball for the first time in a long time is really willing to take a look at itself and go, what's wrong with our game right now, and how do we want to look at changing it? Because as much as we love baseball, it has not resonated with the younger generation in the way that we've hoped it would resonate with them. And I think a labor shortage is the perfect time for labor stoppage is the perfect time to really
and
look into this kind of stuff and how can we change the game.
Look, you were 5 years old, or when
I don't even remember it.
Right. So you
it didn't even register as a stoppage
have not
to
really
me.
Been through these things, and what's interesting to me is when
I've been through it in other sports.
Okay,
because it's happened in basketball previously.
Right. Well, the first one didn't happen until 1972 is even interesting to me in and of itself, because that means that just shows you how
much the owners controlled everything.
I was going to use plantation mentality, and
that's what it was. Let's put it this way: the only thing probably worse was the NCAA.
So in 72, the pension agreement expires, and so the teams, were resistant, the owners, to giving any benefits. Right.
The owners of and. This is where it's hard for me being a millennial, where it's just like there's at no point in any one of these discussions where I'm ever like pro owners on this. I'm like, oh yes, let me cry for the billionaires who are upset that they're going to lose a couple like hundreds of thousands of dollars.
So you saw that a guy got into the Hall of Fame this year, and you heard about his name. I never heard of this guy, Marvin Miller.
Never.
So Marvin Miller, labor, representative for the players. So this is where he first really steps in, and he gets the players to strike for the first time. They've done this for 13 days, and so then the owners, believe it or not, they capitulate.
Right.
They agree to a pension proposal.
Owners are like, well, wait a second, I don't like this.
So in all, 86 regular season games were lost. But here's what's really interesting. They were not rescheduled. They wound up playing a crucial role in the American League East race because the Tigers claimed the division crown, and get this, with an 86-70 record, even though they finished just a half game over the Red Sox. The Red Sox were 85-70. They didn't play the extra game. They just named the Tigers.
Oh.
Could you imagine that happening today?
Today, no, people would lose their minds.
Right. They didn't play the game.
But I think that's where something like the internet has changed, because the ability for the individual fan to voice their displeasure. Because, back in the day, the only way that teams would be like, well, hit him if you want to hit him in the pocketbooks. You don't buy the tickets. It's not really an effective strategy anymore.
It's a true story.
TV deals have insulated the ownership from feeling the wrath of the fans that way. So how do they feel the wrath of the fans? By people screaming on social media. So if you would try to pull something like this, not give the team a shot to play that last game and just name that other team to the playoffs, oh my God.
So this was the first one, and so that makes it important. It was a player strike. That makes it important. And the player reps voted 47-0 in favor of the strike, which spoke that the players were solidly together.
Which I think is also probably why the owners backed down so quickly, is because even if you managed to pull one or two of the players away from it, you were still at like 45-2.
So here, this gets better, right? So what happens in 1973? The very next year, owner lockout. Okay, so February 8th to 25th. This is obviously beginning of spring training.
Pretty much, like just before.
So it's a spring training did not affect the regular season. There was no collective bargaining agreement, and the new collective bargaining agreement that was agreed to established salary arbitration. So
which is now interestingly
deal.
Because now players dislike salary arbitration
very much
because they've realized, oh, wait, the owners have essentially weaponized it in a sense, and it can be very difficult for really good young players to get what they should be getting paid.
Exactly. So you go to 76, and yet there's another lockout. But this is kind of interesting because in 75, and I don't want to get too in the weeds here, okay?
Yeah.
You had Dave McNally, Andy Messersmith, and they got the right to be called free agents. That was the big difference. So you go into this 76 season, the owners have just lost, if you will, the fact that these guys can now be.
But now
declared.
basically a player can hit the open market and have teams bid on them.
So the owners decide, you know what, we're gonna start the season with, we're gonna lock out, and the players and the owners agree to start the season without a collective bargaining agreement. Could you imagine playing the whole season?
There's too much money now.
Right. They wouldn't do. So during the season, this is wild. In July, they established a 4-year agreement in season for a CBA, which today
It's unheard of.
you never see something like that. So it's just amazing how many of these things there were. So in 1980, you had a strike during the regular season. It started April 1st and went to the 8th for a week. So now you've had 72, 73.
So they were really like
a lot of labor
but
stuff.
that makes sense because you were, for so long, you probably had 70 years of baseball history up until that point where the owners just got to do whatever they wanted.
Exactly. So the players decide again to strike in
then,
spring training.
And then the players and the owners do it back and forth.
Same
to
thing
each
again.
other.
The regular season starts on time after the two sides agree to continue talks during the regular season, and they agree in principle to a new CBA.
Just thinking about this with, we don't know when the current labor strike, and I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but it makes sense here. With the current labor strike, because we don't know it's going to be over until, potentially even affecting spring training. Do you think the players are just like, well, if we keep it going, we don't have to do spring training?
Well, and we exactly, because the NFL has shown that playing one fewer preseason game probably doesn't change it. Do you really need 30 preseason games to really evaluate your guys?
You know
on the
who
team?
that benefits? The organization,
Absolutely.
not the players.
You get to look at guys to play against major leaguers. You get to evaluate your talent across the organization. Yeah, I just don't know that that could be something that changes. That's an excellent point. So, and after this 1980 thing, then you had the actual 1981 strike where they didn't play. They lost like 700 games in the season. Actually, 712, I say.
Right, and that was a big year because that was a weird middle of the season strike.
Right. So you had a first half champion and a second half champion, and then you had playoffs, and at that point you had divisional, play. But the first half champion and second half champion just added to the mix.
Yeah, because one of the famous things from that season was what happened to the Expos, where didn't they had the best record overall.
Yeah,
but
they won the
didn't-
second half.
They won the second half.
They won the second half that year. They got really screwed in 94, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then they lost to the Dodgers in a 5-game playoff where Rick Monday hit a game-winning home run, and they called it Blue Monday in Montreal.
For Expos.
Yeah. So that was the real big strike, where you had 700 games lost. And you had
that's the second biggest one, obviously, next to the 94 one.
But the Reds were the team that were left out of the playoffs that year, despite having the best record in all of baseball at 66-42, because they didn't finish in first place in either.
That was I was conflating them with the Expos, which is just that's the weird thing because you were really good, but you weren't the best in either one of them.
And when I think about those early 80s Reds teams, it wasn't like they were good the next year. They went back down again and they were no good,
Right, so what happened?
That was sort of the end of the big red machine sort of holdover stuff because, in 1981, I don't know if they had a few players left. I don't even remember.
A couple of the younger guys that had been on those teams that were entering the twilight of their careers, and then you make them push what might have been their final swan song season along. You really screw with that team.
I don't remember the 1985 strike. Okay, I'm reading.
I can tell you, I don't remember it either, but I wasn't alive.
Yeah. It lasted a whole 2 days.
Oof.
Right in season, August 6th and 7th, which just seems very random, But the brief strike was owed to a dispute over owner pension contributions. Oh, we've heard about this enough times, and the owner's desire for a cap on salary arbitration earnings by players. And it proved that labor stoppages need not be all that damaging. All lost gains during the strike were made up, and the owners then colluded. I'm not supposed to say that. Well, they suppressed the free agent market in off seasons. Let's leave it at that.
Oh yeah, well, man, they've only been accused of doing that a few different times.
So, but actually, they did get accused of collusion later on, and they had to pay $400 million to the owners in damages because they were basically proved to be, collectively holding down salaries.
Exactly. that, okay, you know what, X team, you're not really interested in him. Well, guess what? I'll make sure you don't offer him above this much so that my market doesn't go above this.
So I know we want to get to the 94 strike, and that was before this
The strike.
the last one.
It's been quiet. I thought there was one. They talked about having one.
But before that, wait, there's more. Right, the 1990 lockout. Okay, another spring training lockout, February 15th to March 18th.
I mean, the more I hear about these spring training lockouts, the more I think that players just didn't want to do spring training and found a way out of it with a lockout.
So it's somebody's writing this lockout was in a sense an owner tantrum over the arbitrator's judgment against them for rigging the free agent market.
Yeah, which I think that's why it was only a spring training one, because it would have been a really bad look for them to have a lockout because they were unhappy with a legal judgment.
So they, Fay Vincent ended up getting kicked out eventually because of, basically going for a no strike pledge, which they wouldn't go for. And he left being commissioner, and they ended up playing the season on time, which takes us to the 94-95 strike, which, as everybody knows, was the only time since 1904 that the World Series wasn't played in 1990.
Which really should tell you that the difference between this strike and all the other strikes. This one's been the granddaddy up until now.
Right. And it basically got people turned off the game, which is what all baseball fans are most worried about when you hear work stoppage. And how long are they going to not play games? Are we going to not watch baseball? That's what we care about.
Right, and exactly. And that was one of the big reasons why, if you want to talk baseball conspiracy theories, it's one of the big reasons why a lot of people think Major League Baseball looked the other way on all the steroid stuff. Was coming out of the 94-95 strike. Guys hitting all these home runs was the first positive press for baseball. People were excited about it again, so they weren't going to do anything to jeopardize that.
And it just didn't seem that strike was ever going to end. And actually, as it's written here, only a National Labor Relations Board complaint and injunction issued by future Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor brought the owners to heel and ended the strike. So 938 regular seasons games were lost across the 94 and 95 seasons. Remember, they didn't come back
until like a little bit into the 95 season, right?
So right. And so that really, set baseball back.
It does also kind of speak to me that it is a little insane when you think about it, that essentially because of the whims of 32 people who feel like they're not making enough money, they can deprive the entire country of baseball.
Yeah. And we were so hard up. That was the whole Cal Ripken thing, and you had back-to-back World Series champions in 92 and 93, the Toronto Blue Jays, all right, who didn't get to defend in 94, and then that pretty much ended their
right, because when you
will.
take out that much of a chunk of time, guys, you're going to ruin continuity. You're going to have this. You also, what you do is you deprive yourself of having the changeover. The guys that would retire in 94 and 95 and then they leave the game and you have the new guys starting to step in. Well, you don't get to do that. All those young players, their growth is stunted, and then the old guard leaves unceremoniously.
Exactly.
So you get a bunch of games with what feels like transient players, essentially.
Well, and it's funny you say that, because the 94 strike, as we'll talk about, that ended up having some of the scab players come in there and be a part of it. And I remember the Mets had a guy named Rick Reed on their team in the late 90s who pitched on those.
I remember, yeah.
Teams. Well, he was a scab in the 94-95 strike. And John Franco, who was a Met all that time, just gave him the hardest time because he was a real tough guy when it came to that kind of scabby stuff, at the time. And Rick Reed, it took him a long time. And he was a good pitcher for the Mets.
I remember he had one of the better playoff game starts for the Mets they've ever, like, people talk about that start in particular.
But it's just so funny that when I think about the guy, I think scab.
Wasn't he the one that threw the shutout in the first game of the Subway Series?
Oh, no, that's Dave Malicki.
That's Dave Malicki.
Yeah, Dave Malicki. Anyway, so here we are in 2021, soon to be 22, and we've got CBA that most of us baseball fans feel is going to not make it to the season, but you never know with these crazy people.
I can't see them punting it again. They've punted it like twice already now. It makes too much sense with the labor stoppage already on. That the teams they're going to go through it and renegotiate the CBA and fix this.
And so, what do you think? Your knowledge of this? What do you think the number one issue is for the players? In this instance,
See, that's interesting because I think it's different. Because it's like to me, players are always going to go back to one thing and one thing only. That's the money.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're looking at one. I think If I'm a player, I'm annoyed about how Major League Baseball is monetizing the game.
Okay.
And I would want to have them, I think it's them looking at that in the DH.
I think you said it because it's the amount of control. I would say that the control that the owners have over the players, right? It takes 6 years before a player gets completely free of club control now. And so the problem is that you have guys like our very own Pete Alonso, who is,
who was one of the guys that got treated better than most.
Because he actually brought him up instead of holding him down artificially.
Yes.
But he would not be. He's got to wait 6 years before he can really write his own contract, and some of his best years might be now. So, as everybody knows about baseball, the system is set up that you pay guys after they've already had their best years. A lot of the time, this is what happens.
And this is why you end up with all of these guys that they're and it's the owners have kind of created a bad situation for themselves. This is why you have to give all of these 32-year-old guys these bunker contracts.
I think that's a great point. I think that's true. It's like you keep doing the same thing over and over again, and you're giving let's see. Kyle Seager, who's in his mid-30s, who hit 219 this year, but he had 25, 30 home runs. Is he really a guy you want to give a $15, $20 million?
That's a system that you set up. Now the problem is it's going to take some team. If it's not going to be a change imposed from outside, i.e., the players basically forcing a change through the labor shortage, it's going to take some team going, you know what? We're going to do things differently. Right. Some team would have to look at it and go, okay, we're going to pay our rookie guys after 2 seasons.
Of course, this is coming from the guys that are colluding with each other.
Right, exactly. It's never going to happen.
I don't think so either.
No. The only way it's going to happen is that some small market team would have to essentially, it would be like reverse Moneyball.
So
how do we maximize the contracts to our...
Exactly. And they're going to do that because that's what they've always... In fact, that's what's happening. The average salary in the MLB has gone down over the past 4 years. How does that happen?
Well, you have things like, why was Major League Baseball using 2 different baseballs throughout the season?
Let's not get into the MLB conspiracy theories here. I don't want...
It's wild, though, when you think about it, how... Major League Baseball is always kind of skated by. It's like they have all the leagues right now, all of the major sports leagues have weird little conspiracy theories about them like that. Baseball and the free agent manipulation, NBA's and what they do with the refs, NFL and the thousands of things that go on there.
The games have control, they have power, they exhibit it. I tend to think it's not as nefarious as sometimes people would like to have you believe, but there are things to explain. The baseballs at the MLB level as to how that went down, I think they need to do a better job of explaining
that because when you really think about it, and this is where the owners have a bunch of problems in this negotiation. One, general public is not particularly sympathetic to them right now. On top of that, when you combine that with the fact that they probably don't want to have a big, long labor stoppage. They do not want to lose games this
But they're
spring.
the ones that locked out the players.
But they want their money, but they don't want to lose money.
You know what they want? And I'll tell you what they want. Right now, they want to hold salaries down, right? So the average salary right now, minimum, is $570,000, which to any regular American human being sounds like so much money. But at the major league level and professional, it's not.
It's not. For the rest of baseball, it's not, obviously.
So as I said, this is in 3 years, the salaries have gone down. So it was $4.1 million per player, average player in 2017. It's down to $3.7 million. That's a 10% decline. That doesn't happen by accident.
No, that's a concerted effort to get depressed wages.
And so what do you think about the Major League Baseball proposing also that they have $100 million team salary floor? Do you think that's going to make a difference?
It should. And here's why. Because it's not fair to fans of teams in certain cities that their owner is not really trying to put a competitive baseball product on the field, but gets to skate by because of revenue sharing. They get to make a fortune.
Right. Because the number one reason you would think financially to own a professional sports team is about increase in franchise valuation.
I'm sorry. It's kind of ridiculous that Max Scherzer has a higher contract value than multiple teams' entire payroll. He was $43 million. I think the Baltimore Orioles were $38.
No.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
$38 million?
Yeah.
Wow.
Think about that. If you're telling me that the owners of the Baltimore Orioles are attempting to put out a competitive product on the field, You have to question that when you're only spending $38 million.
So the Players Association, is definitely, interested in talking about a salary floor, as long as they get the average salaries
Right
up,
now, I think
and they get paid early.
the salary floor should probably not be $100 million because I think that's also probably too much for some teams. And I don't think basing the salary floor off of whatever the highest team's payroll is makes sense either. Like you couldn't do it's 60% of whatever the highest, because then the Mets will be like, okay,
We're gonna spend $1 billion.
Yeah, we're just going to spend all the money. Let's see what happens when you can't afford teams.
All of you. I got more money than you.
Yeah, exactly. So I think if you're I think a salary floor is a good idea. Just finding the way to do the number is going to be difficult.
So then you get into the stuff, the other stuff that we think is important in terms of what they're negotiating
DH.
isn't as important. The DH is going to be negotiated. That's almost a surety, I think, that they're going to have a DH because it's another job for players, and the owners can feel like they gave them something.
And it's a really easy thing, because if you're the owners, you would much rather give the DH to half the league than institute a salary floor that'll impact every team.
So we're leaking now into rule changes, which is fine because that was the point. So one of the things that's really interesting about, and we did a whole podcast episode on tanking.
Yes.
Or does tanking really work? So there's been talk about changing the draft order, but in some of them are really weird ways. So let's say you were the first team out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this year that might have been
the Pirates.
Well, no. The first team out, meaning that you had the best record of the teams that didn't make it to the playoffs.
Oh, okay. The team that just missed the playoffs.
Corrected the blue.
So the question then becomes: does it count for the team that lost the wild card?
No, didn't make the playoffs at all.
At all. Okay, so that'd probably be the Blue Jays then.
Right. So that they would get the top pick, first team out, and then they go in reverse order all the way down to that would stop the bottom. Theoretically, right? The team that's then would try to win games at the end of the year to at least not be the last team that gets to pick in reverse order from the first team out. So how many teams? If there's going to be 14 teams in the playoffs, you're going to have 16 teams out. And so the team with the best record of the out, you'd go 16 all the way down. That is one proposal I've heard.
I feel like that proposal is just like, okay, well, you are very much dooming bad franchises then. Part of the advantage of being the worst team is you get your pick.
Yeah, but are bad franchises as bad as they are because at a certain point they just throw up their hands and say, you know what, we'll finish last and get the best pick. That's the argument.
I don't think in baseball. I think that's way more likely in other sports because a singular player can have so much more of an impact on your team's success. But even at one, can you even name the last number one pick in baseball? Can you name any number one picks in baseball?
Baseball is much different than
you don't really look at drafting in the same way. So I think the idea that that instituting anti-tanking things, I think it's you're moving a lot.
I don't know. Believe it or not, a lot of the teams and the players I'm hearing actually think that's kind of an interesting idea. It also gives guys something to play for late in the season when they normally
the only thing that worries me is you're a team that's on the cusp of making the wild card. What's better for
try not to win?
What's better for your team?
Yeah.
Get into a meaningless wild card game when you know you're not going to be able to win the World Series, or you don't win that last game and get the best next kid, and you have another shot the next year.
I understand your point, and I think that maybe some hybrid solution out of having the idea of incenting teams to not lose at the end.
I
of the
think
season
the better way to do it, better way to do it would be to weight a lottery system. Reverse weight the lottery system. So the team with the best record.
You're not talking about ping pong balls here.
I'm talking about ping pong balls. But what I'm talking about is that the Blue Jays in this, they would have the best chance of winning. They would get a guaranteed number X pick. They would be in the top 4 guaranteed, and they would have the best chance of getting the number 1 pick. I think that's the best way to do it because then the worst team still has a chance to pick the best player. You're just not rewarded for it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think you're on to that same thought that it's like there's some hybrid that you could come up with
because I don't like the system of just flipping it because then it's just like you're really creating an underclass of MLB
and they could
teams.
Say the first 4 out and then change it and then lottery them up and all that kind of stuff after that. But I think what we're both saying is that some alteration to the status quo would probably be beneficial to the game. So here we come on the rule changes. So we said they're going to leave in the DH will be for both leagues, universal DH. That seems pretty sure. The 3-hitter rule, right, is still around.
I think That's going to be the only reason I see that going away is if the players are particularly opposed to it, because I don't think owners really care.
I think a player in the throes of a game, I don't know if the players, they're just playing the game.
I don't think they care either. I think it's one of these weird things where it's not the number of people that the metrics that it's showing in terms of does it speed up the game is not something that any one viewer can appreciate, but any one viewer can appreciate the effect that having to have this guy pitch to 3 batters can happen. So I just think that
I think it's a terrible rule. I hate it. I hate the 3-batter rule. I think it takes strategy away from the managers, and a lot of the managers feel the same way. And I think the guy who's managing the Mets is right there with that.
Well, I would say my only caveat to that is I feel like a lot of the managers, the only reason they think it's strategically taking away
stuff.
No, they think it's strategically taking away options is because they don't plan 3 moves in ahead now. You have to. I don't too often do I see managers make single batter switches still. They're making a pitching change because they're caring about 1 batter instead of caring about the 3 batters.
This guy's got to stay in the face 2 more.
Even though the guy is caring about they only think about the 1 guy in that entire thing instead. And so I think there is more room for strategical showing off your understanding of that strategic system that managers right now aren't taking advantage of.
Okay.
And I think managers could do a better job of understanding I have to have my pitchers pitch to 3 batters unless it's around the end of an inning.
And look, it's the rules, so you better plan for it and deal with it.
But how often did we see teams last year get into situations where you're like, I remember specifically,
why is he pitching to him
in the Lindor 3-home run game? I'm pretty sure when he hit the 3rd home run, it was because whoever they brought in had to pitch to him because he had made the switch so they could get out a guy before him that was 0 for 3 on the night or something. So it's just like that's the kind of thing I think teams aren't thinking of.
So I have a way, though, and again, I think because we're talking about, I don't think it'll happen, but pitch clocks. Right, so we've seen them test pitch clocks, and I think everybody's kind of excited about pitch clocks.
Okay, what about this? Here, you want a real wild suggestion that would improve the pace of the game? We saw it a bunch this season. It actually felt pretty good when I was watching them. 7-inning games.
Oh, no. Oh, no, I don't like that at all. I say, so 17-second pitch clock seems to be coming up. I don't know, maybe it'll be 19, it'll be 20, but that is a lot faster than it goes right now. If you have a 17-second pitch clock, you don't need a 3-batter rule.
No, you don't.
Right? Because the games are going fast. I think the games came down to like 240, 230 why don't we just do this?
It's weird because if anything, the games it's like there were a lot of games that felt really nice, quick and tight and needy this year. The problem is that it only takes one of the other type of game to remind you.
One Steve Troxel game, and it's all over.
We watched a couple of those games where you're like, it's 6-5.
Throw it, please throw it.
This game started at 7:00. It's 9:30, and it's 7-6 in the 6th inning. And I'm watching like whoever, freaking Ramon Castro walk another guy because he has to pitch to 3 batters this inning. And I'm
Miguel Castro was the catcher. Yes.
Yeah, but it's just like, oh my God, you don't want to watch that after a while.
So we I don't know how you feel about the 3-batter thing. I'm not sure you're with me. And so we have the runner on second. And you've made some good points about that in the past. So why don't you talk? I think
the runner on second, the way should change it. 10th inning should be played straight up. 11th inning, if you want to have a batter on, put a batter on first. 12th inning onward, then you can put the batter on second. The reason I feel this way is that for the regular season game, it's much like hockey. First overtime, it's great. First extra inning, it's great. Once you get to about the 3rd one, I stop caring. Even if I'm rooting for the team, it's just I just want this game to be over.
I'm with you with the 10th inning being played straight up. I think that's a great change that would benefit. I don't think I'd have a huge problem if you went to second base in the 11th inning or something like that.
I'd even be fine with with ties.
Yeah, it's a great point. Right. Like
after the 10th inning, if the game's still tied, it's a tie. Game over.
What is so wrong? Because baseball doesn't have ties. And I could argue that that's kind of a fun thing to have, like,
right. But it's Americans weird.
Gotta have a winner.
Gotta have a winner. We cannot have a tie. Ties are for Europeans that play soccer. Like, no, we can't have a draw. No.
So
we got rid of it in hockey.
They're also talking about, and I think this is something, I don't know if it'll happen as part of the CBA, but how about the bases being bigger? That seems to be like a no-brainer, doesn't it?
Yes, it's going to be safer too.
Right.
Because one of the reasons players get hurt all the time sliding into bases is because there's not enough space between the fielder's feet and their hands.
Guys get stepped on.
So make the bases bigger.
So 15 inches to 18 inches. The game's going to be ruined.
And you know what? Also, I'm going to say this. You know what I would also say should be a rule change put in for this offseason? I don't know if it's on the table. Get rid of the ability to challenge on a play of checking whether or not the guy came off the base.
I mean, like
on a tag.
an appeal play? Or,
yeah. Like when the guy goes sliding down into second and like he holds the tag there and then they challenge the play and have to review it. No, that's stupid. I'm sorry. It's dumb. I didn't we're not using replay in the way it was intended to break down the absolute minute millisecond that guy was technically not in with contact with the bag for a half second there. He's out.
I so love that you brought this up, okay? Because you know that we had the other conversation, and I feel like if they wanted to do it something that would change the game, take out in-game video replay in the dugout from the guys watching pitcher at bats. Why should players? This is completely different. Yeah, it's a whole nother subject. Why should players have the ability to really understand what's going on? If in traditional baseball, you go up there, you see the pitcher, you talk to your teammates. What's he got today? How's he throwing? But no, you're going in and you're saying, "Oh, I see what he's doing. I see what he's doing." I just don't know if that makes the game.
But now, here's what I'll say: better players have all that, and they still can't hit the baseball. So maybe we shouldn't do anything.
Anyway, I think that's a weird thing.
I'm just saying the weaponization of the replay in that sense to me is really dumb because to me that's what I remember replay mostly being used on this year.
It's sort of like the NBA with the guy stopping to get fouled before, and they changed that rule,
right? Because nobody likes it. Nobody likes to waste 10 minutes on an in-game replay because we're checking to see if there was a split second where the guy sliding into second came off the bag or not. It's not fun.
So here's one that toasts my bagels. I don't know about you, but they in the Arizona Fall League they had the 4 infielders on the dirt with 2 on each side of the base. That's the way they played it this year.
All right, wait, what?
So they basically divided the field in half, and they said if you're going to be an infielder on the left side, you have to stand on the dirt. There's got to be 2 of you to the left side of second base.
So they were doing away with the switch.
It's no shifting around. You can't be in the outfield. You got to play on the dirt. That's nuts.
That's nuts. I don't like it.
I love what they're doing, right? Testing at the minor league level and doing this.
But we even saw it last year. Guys had just adjusted to the shift. All it's going to take is one season of guys being like, well, I will take this free base hit. And then teams will stop doing it as often.
I think baseball goes down a huge slippery slope if they decide ever to do anything about the infield shift at all.
You are that's a rule change that is directly meant to impact the flow of the game. You were trying to say that there's a correct way to play the game when you put in a rule change like that.
So why don't you ever play softball when you were a kid and they had a short center fielder? Like they put an extra fielder in there. They had the center fielder and the floater that would play behind second base. If we did that in baseball, that would be a change. Like everybody go, what? What?
Well, like we do it all. Like what? Okay, so we get Juan Pierre up. Are we not allowed to pull the outfield in? Because he's not going to be able to hit it over their heads?
Well, and that's a good point, right? Because at the end of a game, when you've got the sacrifice fly chance, you always bring the outfielders in because they can't.
Right, are we not allowed?
You guys got to stand back by the fence.
You have to be this close to the fence. No, that'd be silly.
So those things won't be legislated. And the last thing that I think you can count on not happening, if anybody's wondering from the player's perspective, there will not and never be a salary cap in Major League Baseball.
No, never. Baseball doesn't need a salary cap in the way other sports do because two players cannot team up and win everything like you can specifically in basketball.
Right, 40% of your team can be, can make the difference between you winning and losing.
Let's put it this way. Imagine if you would put Steph Curry and LeBron on the same team for all these years. Would anybody beat them? No.
So the baseball players kind of have this without the salary cap. They're never going to give that up. And the owners know that. But don't be surprised if the owners don't try to egg them on by asking them for something else.
What the owners want to make sure that salary, because the problem for the owners is that in order to pay the starkly increasing cost of top-end contracts, which is not helped by people like Steve Cohen.
I was just going to say there's 2 words that go against that. Steve Cohen.
Because he's like, yes, I will give Francisco Lindor $310 million and Max Scherzer $140 for 3. But the problem with that is in order to pay those guys those kinds of contracts, you have to artificially deflate all of the other guys' contracts so that all of those guys that are making the league minimum are making a little bit less so you can afford those big guys. So that is the one thing that I think it's a weird thing where the guys that are most outspoken in the labor shortage for the labor stoppage for the players are the guys that are a lot of times making the most money, who are the most against something like that. Like they're more allied with the owners in that.
They're really not, though.
It's for different reasons.
Right. It's good to see guys like Scherzer fighting for players who are saying we got to pay these guys earlier in their careers. They shouldn't have to wait all that time because there's a whole host of players who don't make it to 5 years.
Yeah, what about the guys that were unbelievable for 4 and then he gets hurt and he never gets paid for what he was doing? He might have been playing like a $30 million a year player and he was getting nothing close to that.
So to close this up, when do you think they will negotiate this? When will we see baseball? And is there?
I predict it's going to look real bad through January. It's going to be a whole bunch of the two sides are not close. Two sides are not close. Then right around the time spring training would be starting.
So like pitchers and catchers
won't report
around middle of February.
That's when things will start turning. And then I expect by the second week in March, they'll have worked everything
So you
out.
think they'll lose spring training games?
They'll lose it's too convenient for the players.
I'm kind of thinking the same thing. I think they might lose spring training games. I don't expect the regular season to be affected.
No, players won't want to lose the money. Owners won't want to lose the money. But neither group really will care if spring training isn't impacted.
And we'll have a DH, universal DH. You think that's going to happen?
We'll have universal DH. We'll probably... The 3 battle rule, I think, is interesting because I
think it's going to stay.
I think it's going to stay.
I don't hear anybody calling for it being pulled.
I think it's going to stay more just because there isn't enough interest in getting it removed. I think you will not see a salary cap. You will not see a pitch clock.
Not this year.
Not this year.
Yeah. I'd like to see a pitch clock. Yeah. I think that's a big change.
Thanks for listening. Subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform.
And you can follow us on Twitter at Almost Coop.
The hood.